Almost every ancient civilization has a flood story. That alone is strange. Mesopotamia had one, Israel had one, Greece had one, India had one. China preserved flood traditions. Even cultures separated by oceans carried stories of a world covered by water. Why? Why would societies with different languages, different gods, and different landscapes keep telling a story about a catastrophic flood? Was it all coincidence? Was it collective memory? Or does the flood story survive? Because it says something permanent about human civilization itself. Most people know the biblical story of Noah. A corrupt world, a divine warning, an ark. Animals preserved, waters rising, a mountain landing, a sacrifice, and then a new beginning. But Noah is not alone. In Mesopotamia, long before many later retellings, there was Atrahasis, and later, Utnapishtim in the Epic of Gilgamesh. The gods decide to destroy humanity. A chosen man is warned. He builds a great boat. He preserves life. The flood comes. The vessel survives. Birds are released to test the waters, and afterward, the survivor offers sacrifice. That is not a small resemblance. In Greece, the story of Deucalion and Pyrrha tells of a world destroyed by flood because of human corruption. They survive in a chest or ark-like vessel. The waters recede, and humanity begins again. In India, the story of Manu tells of a warning before a great flood. A vessel is prepared. Life is preserved. The flood comes, and the world must begin again. In China, flood traditions often focus more on the struggle to control overwhelming waters than at a single arc narrative. But even there, flood memory stands near the beginning of civilization, as if order itself had to emerge out of watery chaos. So the question is not whether flood stories exist. They clearly do. The real question is why they share so many of the same parts. Again and again, the pattern returns. A world becomes corrupt, violent, or disordered. A warning appears. A chosen figure survives. Life is preserved through a vessel, a refuge, or divine guidance. The old world is washed away. The waters retreat. A mountain, high place, or safe ground appears. And a new beginning starts. That pattern is too persistent to ignore. Different cultures tell the story differently. The gods are different. The moral emphasis changes. The tone changes. The details change. But the structure remains surprisingly familiar. And that matters, because stories do not survive for thousands of years by accident. They survive because they carry something. People refuse to forget. Part of the answer may be geographical. Many of the world's first civilizations were river civilizations. Mesopotamia lived between the Tigris and Euphrates. Egypt depended on the Nile. India grew around river systems. China formed along major rivers. These societies knew water as both gift and threat. Water gave fertility. Water gave crops. Water made cities possible. But water also destroyed. A river that nourishes can also drown. A flood can wipe out fields, homes, memory, and order in a matter of hours. So one reason flood stories appear so often is simple. Ancient people lived close to disaster. They knew that civilization is fragile. They knew that the line between order and chaos is thin. But geography alone does not explain the moral shape of these stories, because flood stories are almost never only about weather. They are usually about judgment. That is what makes them powerful. In many traditions, the flood comes when the world is out of order. Violence spreads. Pride grows. Boundaries collapse. Human beings become destructive. Something goes wrong, not only in nature, but in society. And then the flood comes. As a reset, that idea appears again and again. When corruption becomes too deep, the world is symbolically returned to water. Why water? Because in ancient imagination, water often represents chaos. Before order, there is the deep. Before structure, there is the sea. Before the world becomes habitable, waters must be separated, restrained, named, and bounded. So when flood stories describe the world being covered again, they are not only talking about destruction, they are talking about unmaking. Creation is being reversed. The ordered world is collapsing back into chaos. And then, from that chaos, a remnant survives. That remnant matters. In the flood stories, humanity is rarely erased completely. A seed remains, a family remains, a righteous man remains, animals remain, knowledge remains, a future remains. That is one of the most important patterns in all flood traditions. Judgment is not usually the end of the story. Preservation is hidden inside it. The flood destroys, but it also carries. It judges, but it also saves. It wipes away, but it also prepares for renewal. That is why the vessel matters so much. The ark, the chest, the boat, the refuge, whatever form it takes, becomes a symbol of continuity. It is a floating remnant of order in the middle of chaos. It carries memory through destruction. It carries the future through judgment. And that may be one reason the flood story keeps returning in culture after culture. Because civilizations fear two things at the same time. They fear being destroyed by forces outside themselves, and they fear becoming rotten from within. The flood story joins both fears together. Nature becomes judgment. Water becomes a mirror. Disaster becomes revelation. The flood says, you are not as secure as you think. The world can be undone, and if society decays deeply enough, collapse will not feel accidental. That is why these stories never feel like simple weather reports. They feel like moral memories, even when historians debate whether the stories point back to one original catastrophe, multiple regional floods, or shared mythic structures. The deeper truth remains the same. Human beings kept remembering water as the thing that can erase a world, and they kept telling stories in which survival required humility, warning, obedience, preservation, and renewal. That is why birds appear. That is why mountains appear. That is why sacrifice appears. That is why covenant, law, or reordering often appears after the flood. Because the story is not just about surviving. It is about what kind of world should exist after survival. What must be remembered so destruction does not return? What must be rebuilt differently? What kind of human being deserves the future? That is the real power of the flood story. It is not only about the past, it is about the permanent anxiety of civilization. Can order survive corruption? Can a society be renewed after collapse? Can humanity begin again without repeating the same violence? That is why the flood story keeps reappearing. Not because every culture copied one text, not simply because rivers overflow, but because water became one of humanity's deepest symbols for chaos, judgment, memory, and renewal. The flood story survives because it tells the truth ancient people never stopped feeling. The world is fragile. Human beings can corrupt what they build. Judgment can come suddenly. And yet, a future can still be carried through the waters. That is why every civilization seems to remember a flood. Because in one form or another, every civilization fears the waters, and every civilization hopes that when chaos comes, something worth saving will remain.